What? Did you plan to live with us even though you weren't invited? Isn't that a bit too presumptuous? Just looking at your face makes me nauseous. We want to live as a family, so outsiders should leave.
Such heartless words from Caroline. I had always worked hard for my eldest son and his wife, and yet this is the result I get in return. It's just too unfair. I had always acted with my eldest son and his wife in mind, always thinking about how they could have a more comfortable life. That's why I couldn't forgive being treated so disrespectfully. Caroline doesn't seem to understand her position. If that's the case, I'll make her realize it. I decided to thoroughly bring Caroline down. My name is Zoe, a housewife in my 50s. I live with my husband, Ethan. We have one son. Our eldest son, Sebastian, graduated from a prestigious university and got a job at a top-tier company that everyone knows. When Sebastian, whom we had raised with great care, got a job at a top company, we celebrated grandly as a family. It seemed that Sebastian met a wonderful woman through his work. When I first met Caroline, I felt she was a strong-willed, big sister type of person. Since Sebastian had always been a bit shy, I was confident that the two of them would get along well. Both Sebastian and Caroline seemed to be serious about getting married. If that's the case, as parents, we had nothing more to say. Their wedding was a modest one, with only close family and friends invited, but there was a definite sense of happiness there. For me, their wedding became a memorable event. At first, I got along well with Caroline. Although she was strong-willed, she was a bit clumsy and often couldn't do household chores well. For Caroline's sake, I gave her advice on household tips. At first, Caroline seemed to appreciate it, saying,
"Thank you,"
and accepting it sincerely. However, at some point, her attitude started to turn for the worse, and she began to treat me coldly.
"Zoe, you're here again? You really have too much free time. You do our household chores, but are you doing your own household chores properly? Or are you perhaps dumping everything on your husband, Ethan?"
Indeed, I frequently visited Caroline's house to help with household chores because she wasn't very good at them, but that didn't mean I was neglecting my own household chores. Even so, being accused in such a manner made me angry. However, if I retaliated, it would only lead to more trouble. If that happened, it would hurt Sebastian, and I didn't want any conflicts. So, I kept quiet, but that seemed to irritate Caroline even more.
"Ignoring me again? It's really the worst to ignore your daughter-in-law's words. I'm saying this seriously for your sake, but it's painful that you don't listen. Can you leave today? I don't want to see your face. Come on, get out quickly."
With that, Caroline pushed me out of the house. The chores were left unfinished, but since I was kicked out like that, there was nothing more I could do, so I decided to go home quietly. Recently, interactions like today's have increased. When I'm doing housework, Caroline starts making sarcastic remarks, and if I ignore her to avoid conflict, it only makes her angrier, and she ends up kicking me out of the house. So, I tried to switch my mindset to not let it bother me, but that didn't last long. Of course, I thought about consulting Sebastian or my husband Ethan, but I couldn't say anything because I thought it would only make our relationship worse. Even now, I don't know if this was the right choice. But I thought I was making the best choice I could. Little did I know that things were going off the rails. The unpleasant things related to Caroline weren't just one. Another unpleasant incident with Caroline was during the monthly dinner we had with Sebastian and Caroline. To ensure they could enjoy delicious meals and to create time to interact with them, we invited them to our house once a month and held a dinner party where I served the dishes I made. I used high-quality ingredients and put a lot of effort into making delicious food to cheer them up. That day, I had prepared steak. A special steak made with high-quality meat. After grilling it and setting it on the table, the four of us started eating. At first, everyone seemed to be silently enjoying the deliciousness of the meat, but after a while, Caroline threw her knife onto the table.
What? Caroline! What's wrong?
In the sudden turn of events, both Sebastian, Ethan, and I were taken aback. Ignoring us, Caroline yelled at me.
What do you mean by serving such terrible meat? It's the worst. Stop bullying your daughter-in-law. What if I get sick?
Caroline expressed her anger and grabbed me by the collar. But there's no way the meat was bad. It was undoubtedly high-quality meat that I had prepared carefully to ensure it tasted good. It was clear that Caroline was just picking a fight. Although I was irritated by this, I didn't want the atmosphere to get any worse, so I apologized sincerely, saying,
Caroline, I'm sorry if it didn't suit your taste. I just wanted to make you happy.
Then Caroline said,
I don't want to eat anymore.
She grabbed her things and left the house.
Caroline was acting strange today.
Sebastian, who was left behind, muttered quietly. That confirmed it for me. Sebastian didn't know Caroline's true nature. But should I reveal Caroline's true nature? After much deliberation, I decided not to talk about Caroline. Or rather, I couldn't talk about her. If I talked about Caroline, I would be the one to create a rift between them. I couldn't do that. My relationship with Caroline continued to deteriorate day by day. I often spent sleepless nights worrying about how to get along with her. One day, Sebastian came to our house with a proposal.
Why don't we live together?
According to Sebastian, they were making arrangements for us to live together. They were looking for a suitable property for the four of us to live in. Caroline, who had experience working in real estate, was in charge of finding the property. It was hard to believe that Caroline would agree to live together. I couldn't help but suspect there was something behind it, but living together was very efficient in supporting them. So, I immediately agreed to live together and waited for things to progress. Eventually, when the property was decided, I went to view the new house with Sebastian. When we arrived at the address Caroline had sent, we were astonished. The place Caroline had chosen for the move was a high-rise apartment. And not just any floor, the top floor.
No way!
Sebastian seemed unable to accept this reality. Caroline greeted us as we stood there in shock. Although Sebastian was troubled throughout, he reluctantly agreed to the move to the high-rise apartment when we said we would cover the costs. Since Caroline had gone to the trouble of deciding on the place, I was concerned that refusing the move would only worsen her mood. We planned to cover the rent, but then something happened that changed everything. It was Caroline's statement on the day of the move. When I brought in my belongings, Caroline pointed at me and said this.
Zoe, are you planning to live with us?
I tilted my head in confusion at Caroline's words. Wasn't she looking for a house for us to live together? Of course that's the intention, but... I answered, puzzled by Caroline's words, and she laughed cruelly and said something terrible.
What? Did you plan to live with us even though you weren't invited? Isn't that a bit too presumptuous? Just looking at your face makes me nauseous. We want to live as a family, so outsiders should leave.
With that, Caroline pushed me out of the house as she had done before. She also pushed Ethan out in the same manner. We slumped in front of the entrance. When she had suggested living together, I had hoped that Caroline had changed her heart. But I was wrong. This was Caroline's plan. It was a setup to break my spirit completely. Unforgivable. I had always worked hard for Caroline and Sebastian, and yet my feelings were treated so carelessly. It seems Caroline doesn't understand her position. Then I'll make her understand. Feeling this way, I devised a plan to bring Caroline down. In the end, my husband and I were kicked out of my eldest son's new house. But giving up was not an option. Ethan and I discussed our future plans. Ethan agreed with the plan I had devised, so we decided to take action immediately. First, I called Sebastian, confirmed that Caroline was there, and asked him to put the call on speaker. Then I said,
If Caroline wants it, let's cut ties. From today, we are no longer family.
When I said that, Sebastian, looking frantic, tried to stop me.
Mom! Don't say that! If you and Dad are gone, how will we?
Sebastian seemed truly desperate. Honestly, I felt sorry for him. After all, Sebastian wasn't at fault. But Caroline, trying to calm Sebastian, said,
Isn't it fine? Cutting ties, right? It feels refreshing to get rid of useless people like Zoe. Now I don't have to worry about pleasing Zoe anymore.
But
He seemed troubled, but Caroline, ignoring him, said,
So, we're cutting ties. Don't call us again.
and she hung up the phone. This meant we had cut ties. But this was still an incomplete form. The revenge drama had just begun. In fact, the real part was yet to come. For that, we executed our next plan. The next event occurred 3 days later. When I returned from work, I found 200 missed calls, all from Caroline. Seeing the date, I realized it was my payday and understood what was happening. Although we had already cut ties, I was curious about how desperate she was, so I decided to take the call once.
Zoe, where are you? Are you at home? Please, come to our place immediately. Help us.
As soon as I answered, Caroline's voice was filled with panic. I couldn't believe she was so cornered by something like this. I couldn't help but chuckle at her desperation, which only made her angrier.
What are you laughing at? We're in serious trouble. If this continues, we'll be kicked out of our home. You're our only hope.
Being kicked out. Those words gave me an idea of what was happening to my eldest son and his wife. But instead of addressing the obvious, I asked, "What happened?"
Actually,
When I asked, Caroline began to slowly explain what had happened to them. She had just noticed the problem a moment ago. Today was Sebastian's payday, and Caroline, excited to have money in hand, went to the bank. However, when she checked the account, it was $1,300 short. She tried to ask Sebastian what was going on, but he was at work and couldn't answer the phone. Caroline, who managed the household finances, understood how critical this missing $1,300 was. Caroline had planned to use this $1,300 for rent. Without it, she was panicking about not being able to pay the rent. but with Sebastian at work, she didn't know who else to turn to, so she decided to ask us, who were originally supposed to cover the rent.
If we can't pay the rent, we'll be kicked out. We just got this place, and now we might have to give it up.
Indeed, if Caroline and Sebastian were kicked out of the high-rise apartment they currently live in, they would have nowhere to go and would be in trouble. From Caroline's perspective, she must somehow secure $1,300 to pay the rent.
That $1,300 will never be deposited again. You see, it was the money I was sending as an allowance. Since we've cut ties, I didn't think there was any need to send the allowance this month. So, no matter what you say, I can't help you. You'll have to figure it out on your own.
Yes, the $1,300 that Caroline mentioned was not Sebastian's salary but the allowance I had been sending. Sebastian actually had a very low income, and the couple was struggling financially. Sebastian was so worried about this that he was once completely exhausted. Seeing Sebastian in such a state, I couldn't bear it and decided to send him an allowance. It was a gesture of parental love, hoping to make things a little easier for him. Sebastian was grateful for it, but he felt ashamed to be receiving an allowance from his mother at his age. I made a suggestion to Sebastian. Just because you're married doesn't mean you have to be completely open about everything. If keeping something hidden can protect your heart, it's okay to consider it as your own earnings. Initially, Sebastian felt guilty, but this was the only way to protect his heart. Thus, the $1,300 I was sending had to be seen as Sebastian's salary from Caroline's perspective.
What? Keeping secrets from me is too much. I've been doing my best too.
Caroline's voice sounded as if she was disheartened. But it wasn't enough. The responsibility for belittling me and my husband was far greater than this.
How are we supposed to live?
Caroline asked me desperately. But that wasn't my concern. After all, it was Caroline who had angered us. If Caroline hadn't behaved so terribly, this could have been avoided. Yet, when she finds herself in trouble, she turns to anyone for help. Even if it's the mother-in-law she once bullied, she makes no exception. Her overly self-serving attitude made me sigh, and Caroline, noticing this, hastily apologized.
Please, Zoe, help us. If this continues, we really won't be able to manage. What will happen if Sebastian ends up on the streets? Sebastian is your precious only son, right? Just giving us $1,300 would solve everything.
Certainly, it would be troubling if Sebastian were left homeless. However, I had prepared for such an eventuality. If Sebastian ever found himself in such a situation, he was to come to our house. That was the promise between us and Sebastian.
If Sebastian ends up homeless, as long as he divorces Caroline, we will take him in. Sebastian is our precious son. We know he has a kind nature, so we will extend a helping hand.
It is Caroline we want to corner, not Sebastian. It would be too cruel for Sebastian to suffer as well. If things got tough, we had always planned for the three of us to live together.
What? That's unfair. I'll come to Zoe's house too. Yes, that's right. You must be at home now, right? I'll come over and talk to you face to face so we can understand each other.
Honestly, I couldn't stand the thought of living with Caroline anymore. After all, she had said we weren't family. Living with someone like that was impossible. We had already cut ties, so even taking this call was an act of last mercy. Yet, Caroline's selfishness was overwhelming.
It's pointless. Even if you come to our house, it won't matter. You don't know our address, do you?
When I said that, Caroline looked puzzled. It seemed Sebastian had kept his promise to us.
We've moved to a beautiful new house. We're no longer at our old address, so coming to see us is futile.
From the day Sebastian and Caroline moved into the high-rise, we started looking for a new place. A real estate agent we knew introduced us to a house with unbeatable conditions. It was less than a year old and still in pristine condition. We fell in love with it at first sight. Now, we live in that house. Of course, we told Sebastian the address, but we also instructed him not to reveal it to Caroline under any circumstances. Sebastian, being timid, might accidentally let it slip, but it seemed our worries were unfounded.
No way! Where's the new house? Tell me now! We are family, aren't we? Family helps each other in times of need, right? We are in trouble right now. Please, help us.
Pretending to be family at this point? Caroline had said we weren't family and that seeing us made her nauseous. Now that things were bad for her, she was trying to act like family to get help. It was too selfish and made me feel sick. I hadn't given up on Caroline from the start. I had tried my best to become family with her. But it was Caroline who nullified all those efforts. The more I talked, the more my hatred for her grew. Maybe if we talked now, I could forgive her for everything she had done, but that wasn't the case. Caroline was an unnecessary presence in my life. Returning to her and living as a family would be hell for me. So, I made it clear.
Stop pretending to be family. Do you remember what you did to me? You kicked me out of the house, called my cooking terrible, said seeing me made you nauseous, and repeatedly treated me horribly. There's no way I can become family with you now. Give up on me. Take care of yourself. Don't contact us ever again.
With that, I hung up the phone. Caroline kept saying,
Wait, please.
And,
Let me talk.
but it was no longer my concern. As soon as I hung up, message notifications started flooding in. As expected, they were all from Caroline, but the notifications were so annoying that I blocked her contact. Finally, I was free from the presence that had disturbed my peace. I felt a deep sense of relief. Eventually, Sebastian divorced Caroline. It wasn't just the financial struggles. Sebastian had long been dissatisfied with Caroline's attitude towards me. The usually quiet Sebastian even yelled at Caroline during the divorce mediation, showing how much anger he had bottled up. He even demanded alimony from Caroline. Of course, Caroline couldn't pay, so she fled to her parents for help. But when her parents learned what she had done, they were furious. They kicked Caroline out and essentially disowned her. With no one to rely on, Caroline now lives in a shabby apartment, struggling to pay the overdue alimony. It's easy to imagine she is living a hellish life. Since then, we have been preparing to welcome Sebastian into our home as promised. However, Sebastian felt guilty for not standing up to Caroline sooner, so he decided to live in a rented apartment for a while. He quit his low-paying job and is now actively job hunting. I offered to resume the financial support, but he declined, feeling it was inappropriate after everything that happened. We are watching over Sebastian. We believe he will eventually find a good job that matches his skills. As parents, we pray for Sebastian to have a bright future.
How was this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.